Welcome, everybody. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the brain. And it's kind of interesting, all the different things that it ties into. And I think that there's a lot of aspects of the brain that we approach understanding, but we don't. There's so much we don't understand. And there's so much that we think we do, but we don't. But first, my daughter left me a note. It says, "Dad, I am not having a good day. Ashley is telling me what to do, and Rebecca is being more mean. Can you help?"
Can you help me stop it? It is annoying. Love, Elisa. Mad, angry, frustrated. Frowny face. Elisa's heart
is broken. Thumbs down. Well, Elisa, she has such a tender heart. Elisa, you'll be alright. Sometimes we have rough days. Just know you'll be okay. We're back. The brain's it's a very, very interesting thing. But we teach our brains how to think, and our brains follow patterns. And when you say that, how to think, that's kind of a vague and odd and weird sentence. And here's the way I think about it, and here's the way that I think is a decent way to describe it. Imagine a field, right? A wild field. It's just open and ready to be explored. When we think, we walk a path into that field. And when we think, oh, this person did this person did this person did this, it brings not only thoughts but emotions get tied to that path that we walk. As we explore, this is as we're little, as we're babies, it starts, that's where we start to develop that brain and start to and even before in the womb we're influenced by that. And that's why one of the reasons why they've done studies where babies who listen to Mozart or just classical music, or they're oftentimes they have greater higher IQs and greater cognitive whatever. It's better for the baby, supposedly, which I think is probably true. The thing that we do, though, is as we explore this open space, there's, just like in a town or in a place where we know where things are, we develop paths to get to certain places in that field or in that exploration. And that's not the only way to arrive to a certain place, but the more we go down a certain path, the more ingrained it gets. And then eventually the flowers or the grass or whatever it is growing ends up dying, and it creates an actual path that will last for a long time. And because those paths are created, when we come back to that area, our mind automatically knows how to think in that area. And so that's one of the reasons why we develop a pattern of thinking in our mind that gets ingrained in us, and it's very hard to get out of. And this is one of the reasons why pornography is so damaging to the brain, is because what pornography does is it restructures those paths, and it makes your mind think certain things are normal that aren't normal. It makes your mind think that certain things are that's regular, and it's everybody thinks that way, or everybody has that envisions that, or everybody it makes these things that are that you consume visually or audibly or however it is, and it makes them ingrained paths that your mind follows. And then when you get out into the real world, you think that something is normal, and it's not. It's actually very, you think of the atrocious things in the world: rape, murder, whatever it is, those things are not normal. Those things are not regular. You think of people cheating on their spouses, adultery. That's not normal. When you ask anybody, I don't know if you've done this, and I haven't done it too much, but I think it's safe to say that when you ask a random person if it's a good thing or a bad thing to cheat on their wife or their husband, or they'll say no. They'll say that's not a good thing because it's not. It damages the family. It damages the relationships. It betrays the loved ones. But in when someone is bombarded by pornography, they not only do they get addicted to it, but it becomes a normal thing and it becomes a normal behavior. That's why it's so dangerous. When when you, I've it's been a long time, so I don't know the study off the top of my head, but I know that there's been studies that have been done with people in prison, and something like is in the 95% range, something like that, 95, 97. And again, it's a long time, I'm probably off on that, but I remember it's extremely high, the number of prisoners who one of the first things that they got into was pornography. And there's that there's not necessarily the causation there, but there probably is a correlation. There probably is a reasoning of that's something that changes the way you think and view the actual real world. And people say, "Oh, I'm not hurting anybody else," but you're hurting your brain and your mind, and you're hurting the way you view the real world, and that's comes down to how your brain works. The same thing with when you think negatively about people. When you see somebody and and you bring up in your mind something negative towards that person, each time you see them, that comes back to your mind, and it develops a path. And your mind, as soon as you see that person, you no longer have to think about it. You automatically have a negative connotation towards that person, whether that person deserves it or not. Same with a positive. That's how you develop these hero complexes. When you see that person and you have adoration, you have admiration, you think so greatly of somebody, and when you realize that they're just a person, it's shattering to you because you've developed in your mind this pathway that associates that person with virtue or with greatness or with whatever it is that you've praised them for. That's one of the interesting things about the effects of movies and of media on us as a culture is I never really understood, and I still don't excuse it, but I think I understand it a little better, why people trust or listen to these celebrities, and how their opinions in real life, when they bring out political statements that are just crazy, and people will be like, oh, they said it, but in their mind they've associated this person with a superhero, or this person with a great mother, or this person with a whatever it is that they've associated that person with. And so they naturally, without even thinking about it, their mind just automatically follows the path that they've already built. And it's interesting. There's so I don't know a ton of psychology, but from what I've read, which is probably more than average, but probably less than anybody who's invested time into the field. But from what I remember, Adler, Jung, and what's his name, Freud, those three kind of had an interesting relationship. Adler or Freud and Carl Jung were acquaintances, friends, kind of, and then they kind of disliked each other, but they were in the same club and stuff like that. I don't know, but they both have these views on how when you were a child, you develop these thought routines that you can't control and you can't change. And as you grow, you can't really change them. And Adler was the one who was like, no, that's not really. He didn't buy into that. He thought that you can change him, but it's difficult. And not because of Adler, but because of my view on Christ. I think that that's true, that we can change, that we can, regardless of who we are and regardless of what we've been through, how we've developed our perception of the world, we can change and we can be reborn. We can be renewed, and we're not a lost cause. Um, but it is difficult. I remember, and so I grew up in a family that my parents they loved a lot of like self help books. Like I mean, when we were kids, we would listen to audiobooks about like how to win friends and influence people, and like Rich Dad Poor Dad, and just a lot of some self help, some finance, some just a lot of random things, but it was always trying to prove ourselves and get better. My parents were really big on that, and I appreciate that. One of the things that my mom always said, and I don't know if there was some psychological study that she was going off of. I suspect she was going off of something like that. But she would always tell me when I was little that in your mind, you have to have 7 positive experiences with something or someone to negate, just to get to equal grounds from one negative experience with someone or something. And what that basically means is that, okay, somebody is mean to you, or somebody does something mean to you, for them to become on equal grounds in your mind subconsciously, they need to be nice to you for 7 times just to get back to ground zero. And that was just because of the way that our minds focus so much on negative experiences compared to positive experiences. I don't know where the basis of that is, but as I've grown and stuff, I've kind of kept that in my mind. I've kept that attitude of like, oh, I'm naturally going to lean towards the negative, and I try to overcompensate for that, and I try to be more positive, and I think that's helped me in my perspective. I don't know. Again, I don't know how. I don't know the science behind it or anything like that, but I know the practical application, and it's been good. It's been good to help me to understand what is what's really going on in my mind, and it's just interesting how our minds are really good at figuring something out and then kind of storing that away, but yet not consciously having to think about it. You think of how you, I mean, even things like muscle memory. When in football, I remember we would do drills every day where we would take 2 steps and that was it for a play. 2 steps and that was it. And it was just 2 steps to help us get that muscle memory for when we would actually have to do the play. And it was we were training our muscles and training our brain to do this without thinking, so we could think about where the blitz is coming from, where people are doing things, and it's it's one of those things that you really don't think about because your mind takes care of it. If you've ever worked with your hands and you've listened to music or listened to stories or listened to something while you're working, when you're doing something that you know how to do and you've done 100 times, and I used to do granite countertops, and when I was polishing, or when I was doing a seam, or when I was doing when I was installing whatever it was, most things that I could do without thinking about, and that's because our minds learn how to do things and take care of it, and leave us open to explore new paths in that field, I guess you could say. So that's not just pornography, but things that are addictive, things that have that addictive nature. What they do is they go through and they pave new roads in that field. They put in extra work with, so usually you would think, oh, you have to think of something over and over and over, or do something over and over and over to create a field. But things that are addictive, that our minds naturally crave, or our bodies have addictions to, and that can be mental, that can be physical. I mean, it's they're very interlinked. They're very tied together. That creates it paves a new field, or a new road, that our mind makes a connection that is hard to get rid of, and that's what makes it an addiction. Is that it changes with pornography. It changes the way you think. With drugs or with other things like that, it changes the way that your body expects to the stimuli your body expects. And when something goes wrong and it can't have that, then it goes into emergency mode, or it goes into like, oh, what's going to happen mode. And I'm sure people have done studies and have a lot of opinions about how that actually occurs. I'm just trying to go off of practical knowledge and practical understanding. One of the things that has really been interesting to me as I've done, so I do computer science, and I've contributed to some artificial intelligence programs and some open source projects and stuff like that. And one of the guys I work with, he's the lead developer for a big open source artificial intelligence program called Brain.js, and I've contributed a little bit on that. I'm no expert by any means, but I've done a decent bit of research and stuff. And it's interesting how even in the software field, when we create this construct that is designed and created after our understanding of the brain, and this is something, I mean, it's not nearly perfect. Our brain has a lot more things going on. I mean, our brain's a lot more complex than what these simple neural network structures are. But you can see that it's basically a black box that you can't get into. You can't make sense of it from looking at how the pieces put together. It doesn't make sense from what we could understand, what we think of as a math or function or whatever. It's really hard to trace what is actually happening when you give input and when that filters through the network. And the advantage of neural networks and stuff that we control is we control the input. We decide what goes into it. Our bodies and our brains are not that controlling. We have our senses, our sight, sound, touch, taste. We don't necessarily control those things that we observe. We can control the media we observe. We can control the media that we view. We can control where we're at and what we're doing. So agency is one of those things that is really interesting, because if we view our brains from a deterministic standpoint, oh, we're just the product of stimuli, we're just the product of how we've been trained. And a lot of the deterministic people who subscribe to that way of thinking, first off, they're wrong. That basically is saying we have no agency, and if we have no agency, then there is no point in anything. I mean, if there's no agency, then we're nothing. We literally are just a construct, and your thoughts don't matter, your actions don't matter. There is no morality. There's nothing if there's no agency. Agency is the ability to choose one thing over another, the ability to have a decision in what you do. That's what agency is. And agency in the brain is one of those things that we can't always control our thoughts. We can't always control what we think, but we can decide to let our thoughts stick around. If we have if a thought that comes to us is a bad thought, we can't really stop all bad thoughts from coming into our minds. But we can decide if that bad thought stays in our minds, if that bad thought has a place to live inside our head, or if we just get rid of it and fill it with a good thought. There's some interesting stuff about how we really, there's the old saying, idle hands are the devil's play tool. When we're not doing anything, that's when it's easiest for us to fill our time with stuff that's not beneficial to us, that's not helpful to us, that's not making our lives better or making the lives of those around us better. When we're not doing anything, when we're just filling the time, that's when it's interesting, because I make a general statement like that, but also you think of like times that you're just having fun with your friends and stuff like that, and you could say, oh, I'm not doing anything, but you actually do have a goal in mind. You actually do have hey, let's go have fun, let's do something, that's not necessarily doing nothing. When you're just doing nothing, that's where we're susceptible to temptation. And that's why people fill their time with pornography a lot of times. I think, not why, but one of the things is because it gives you something to do that is better than nothing, you think, which it actually isn't. You just haven't found something better yet. That's about all. Rock the party.